Who would have thought that Misaki and Morikawa would end up being in the same clan? Or in this case, nation. Overdress is truly a magical game.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another set review for DBTL1 Genesis of the 5 Grades. We already talked about Dragon Empire and Dark States, so today we're gonna tackle the third nation, which is of course Keter Sanctuary, the home for the deck that screams Morikawa and to some extent also Battle Sisters that, interesting enough, plays a little bit differently with a different name. But before we dive into the set review, if any of these cards pique your interest, you can head over to Parkage to get yourself some products with the new Overdress era, and on top of that, you can use the discount code TIMELEAP5 to get 5% discount on the entire order. Now, with that said, let's dive straight into the set review for Keter Sanctuary, and we begin just like any other with all the triggers that they got. And together with the starter deck and the set, they got a total of 8 triggers, but 7 of those are gonna be 3 stars, which are the 2 heals, 2 fronts, 2 critical, and 1 of the heals from the starter deck. But that said, the 8th trigger, which is the 2nd heal, which in this case is Hex Orb Sorceress, is going to be for me a 1 star because we don't really need another heal. We've already got 1 heal, as soon as we can only run 4 heals per deck. So sadly, she's kind of redundant. But that said, we also got a couple of starters because we have the starter from the starter deck, which is Knight of Heavenly Bow's base, which has the standard ability, although when this unit is rode upon, if you went second, you draw a card. Just like all the other starters for the Overdress era, it's gonna be a 3 stars as it's fine for what it provides. But on top of that, they also got the starter from the set, which is Tri-Connect Sorceress. And this is going to be a 1 star because it's the same skill, so it doesn't really serve any purpose besides being a different artwork. Now, another card that doesn't really fulfill any purpose, just like in every other nation, is the random vanilla card they got from the starter deck, which for Keter Sanctuary is Shadow Bow Archer Lysana. And this is of course a 1 star because it literally is useless. Now moving forward, we see the new PGs within this set, and the first one they're gonna tackle is the PG from the starter deck, which is Life-Saving Angel Kurabiel. And Kurabiel is just a standard PG, so it's going to be a 3 star for me because it's just nice, but nothing really special that we see sometimes with PGs. But one PG that is the PG from the set, that is Aegimis Mare Dragon. And Aegimis Mare Dragon has the special ability, although when the unit's put on the Guardian Circle, choose one of your units, and it cannot be hit until the end of the battle. If your hand has 2 or more cards, choose a card from your hand and discard it. So this is a normal PG, but in certain circumstances, when you're running low on cards, it can be a PG that doesn't need to discard a card from hand. This can definitely save you in those specific scenarios, but it won't be activating on every single time or every single turn. So with it in mind, I think it's an okay, alright, pretty decent, good 4-star PG. It's not amazing, but it's pretty good and definitely way better than average. However, the nation-specific order card, which is Light Dragon Deity of Honors, or Martinoa, is definitely a 5-star card. Of course, there is an issue within this card that if you check it early game when you have no rearguards, it doesn't really do anything. But a lot of the times, when you at least have a rearguard, you get value of it with the extra drive check, and somewhat similar to the Dragon Empire one if you just have 1 rearguard with a single drive in the early game. But mid to late game, once you have an entire full board and maybe 1 or 2 are great frees, it is a lot of advantages that is actually ridiculous. And just by having drive checks on your rearguards, that in itself will promote some very interesting plays that you can do. Bastion with Great Freeze is kind of ridiculous, but the other build with Hex Orb Sorceress that can manipulate the top deck, you can actually prepare when you see this card on the top of your deck, and you can create a field accordingly to get the most bang of your buck for this with this card. So with that in mind, I think it's kind of ridiculous, this order card, and definitely deserves 5 stars. Now, with that said, we're gonna go into the generic support cards, and we start off with the grade 1, which is Swordsman of Heavenly Winds Weagle, or Weichel. And Weichel has the ability, although in a regular circle, when this unit boosts, this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of turn. So it's a 10k booster. Now for me, this is going to be a 2-star because the problem is it's not as useful in this nation because this nation mostly already have better boosters and or utilizes way better effects that can advance their game plan in the likes of the Sorceress archetype that doesn't really care all too much for this 2k power, much rather want to have more utility skills. So that's why for me it's gonna be a 2-star card. Now followed up we have another great one, which is Martinoa Wolf, which has the ability Act on Rigid Circle, costs Soul Blast 2, and this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now again, this is going to be a 2-star card. Yes, you can stack this power, and yes, not every build is gonna rely on a lot of soul, but this is just not worth it, and you can utilize your soul much more efficiently, and I'm not too keen on this card. Yes, you have Premium that can see this as another extender for the whole Weissman loop, but again, long viewers of this channel know that my primary focus is the standard format, and thus I'm gonna rate them accordingly. So for that, this card feels more like a 2-star card. Now another generic grade 1, which is actually kind of useful right now, but overall my opinion is I'm not too happy about the card, is Painkiller Angel. And Painkiller Angel has the ability on a Rigid Circle. At the end of the battle, this unit boosted, costs Soul Blast 1, and retire this unit, and draw a card. Now, I am going to give this card 4 stars, but the reason for that has to do with the discussion that I had with Twitch chat when I live streamed the live stream version of these videos, and it gave them the initial rating. They were really hampering down this card's definitely a 4-star worth for the draw engine. I would personally say it's more in keen to a 3-star, and the reason for that is that this is basically a cycle card that costs you extra resources, as you retire this card and you draw a card. So that's a cycle, but in order to do it, you need the Soul Blast. And just like we see in V-Series Angel Feathers, all their cycle cards had unnecessary costs attached to them for some apparent reasons, and this trend continues in Overdress. And I did not like any of those cards, and also I do not like this card for that reason. However, it isn't as bad as those cards, because most of those cycle cards came at the end of the V era, when we already had a lot of cards to work with, and the card pool was quite a lot bigger. Now with Overdress having a brand new card pool and less options to choose from, this card is suddenly a lot better just by the sheer fact that you can slam it down, it's a bit of aggression, and you can draw into better cards in the while doing so. So therefore I definitely can see the value right now, but I can definitely see this card being rotated out once we have better cards to work with. But with Twitch chat in mind, I think it's alright to give this card a 4-star rating with the value that it provides to the nation at this current instance. Now with the generic support out of the way, let's go over these archetype specific support, and we start with the archetype from the main set, which is the Sorceress archetype. And we of course are going to start with a right line, and that starts with the grade 1, that is Tier Square Sorceress. And Tier Square Sorceress has the ability Auto, when this unit is rode upon by Platina Gleam Sorceress, cost counter plus 1 and draw a card. But also has the ability Auto Rigid Circle, once a turn, choose once per turn, when your drive check reveals a trigger unit, cost counter plus 1, choose one of your opponent's front or rear guards and put it on the bottom of your deck. Now to me this is an alright card. Like, drawing a card for a counterblast, it's fine, like that's generic value. It's not as good as other right lines that can give you the draw for free, so that is a kind of an hindrance here. And the rear guard circle skill is, it's alright, it gives control options and it can screw over certain decks like Overdress, sending all those cards to the bottom of the deck can be quite painful. And yes, it's behind the drive check trigger condition, but this deck can forcefully activate those trigger effects, so that shouldn't be too big of a problem. It all comes down to how much counterblast you have left to work with, and it might not be all that much, as we're gonna see in the second tier. To me, this is more like a 3-star card. Like, it's fine, but it's definitely not amazing. The early draw, even though it's behind the counterblast, it at least allows you to get some draw power in the early game that can definitely help you to set up. So it's fine, but it's definitely not one of the most amazing cards. Probably more teetering down the 2-star range instead of the 3-star range, but I'm fine keeping it here for now. Now, if we go up to the grade 2, we see Pentagleam Sorceress, and Pentagleam Sorceress has the ability Auto. When this unit is rode upon by Hex Orb Sorceress, aka the grade 3, look at the 3 cards on the top of your deck and put them on the top of your deck in any order. This is quite huge. Seeing the top 3 and being able to manipulate that and knowing what's going to happen with your twin drive and potential draws is pretty good, and it can set up your twin drive and your next grade 3 play. So this is already pretty powerful. But then also, Auto, when this unit is placed on a rear guard circle, look at the top card of your deck and put it on the top or bottom of your deck. If you put it on the bottom of your deck, this unit gets power plus 2k until the end of that turn. That 2k power means absolutely nothing. It all comes down to the fact that it allows you to check the top card and able to put it on the bottom if you want to do so, which is really, really good right now in this current stage of Vanguard. So for me, this is a solid 4-star card. The Vanguard Circle ability is pretty good within the right line, and then the Vanguard Circle ability is versatile and generic enough that you can play it in the intended archetype, but you can also play it in a Bastion build to increase the consistency of that deck, and you will see that in a second once we go over the Bastion variant. So definitely a 4-star card in my opinion with the versatility of this card. Now if we go to the grade 3 of the right line, we see of course their new boss unit, which is Hex Orb Sorceress, and Hex Orb Sorceress has the ability Auto Vanguard Circle. When your drive check reveals a trigger unit, choose one of your rear guards and it gets power plus 10k until the end of that turn. So this basically turns every trigger into 20k power instead of 10k power. Yes, you need to give the power to the rear guard, but that isn't necessarily an actual hindrance, because if you attack with the Vanguard while having a booster as well, that means you can give the trigger power to the Vanguard, but the 10k power of her skill to the booster, thus increasing the Vanguard's overall power, that attack, with the whole 20k. So this gives a lot of pressure behind your Vanguard attack, and your opponent basically cannot guard the conventional way, and they have to perfect guard your Vanguard to be sure that it blocks the attack. Even guarding with the overtrigger, the 50k shield, might not be enough unless they throw in another couple of cards, as you can easily break through that if you hit 2 triggers. So it's kind of ridiculous if you think about it, as it negates one of those new perfect guard that is the overtrigger. So that in itself gives a lot of potential pressure to this deck. But on top of that, it also has the ability act on Vanguard Circle once a turn. If you Persona row this turn, cost Counter +1 and Soul +1, reveal up to 1 critical trigger or front trigger from your hand and put it on the top of your deck. And this unit gets Drive +1 until the end of turn. Now, Counter +1 and Soul +1 to gain a drive check, it is alright. Like, you gain another card in hand and you could potentially gain a trigger effect. Now, you could also force a crit or a front, and if you do it that way, this skill doesn't give you any card advantage, as you remove a card from your hand to just force that trigger effect, and the only thing that the Counterblast and Soul Blast then provides is that critical trigger effect or that front trigger effect plus the extra 10k of the Vanguard's first ability. Now, in my honest opinion, this is a very powerful effect, but all things considered, it's gonna be a 4-star card in my opinion, and the reason for that is because this secondary effect is behind the Persona right clause, resulting in a skill that's not consistent. It is very much likely that you will not be able to activate this ability the entire game. So that being a factor, the only thing that's reliable is her first ability, which also in itself is kind of inconsistent because that relies on triggers in the first place. So this card relies on a couple of things to go right, and if it goes right, it is ridiculous. But it can also not go right, and you low roll quite heavily, and the deck becomes very vanilla. Now luckily we do have some support that makes this deck a bit more consistent, and you can rely on at least some pressure out of this card, but it needs more support. But that support is very much possible, and I can definitely see it happening, so that's why I think it's a solid 4-star card. Now, speaking about the support, let's go over the cards that can directly support this archetype, and those fall in the line of the archetype with the name Divine Sisters. And the first one that we're going to talk about is a great one, which is Divine Sister Tartine. And Tartine has the ability Auto. When this unit is placed on the rear guard circle, cost Soul Blast 1, and rest this unit. Look at the 2 cards on top of your deck, choose a card from among them, put it on the top of your deck, and put the rest on the bottom of your deck. Now, to me, this is a solid 4-star card, as it allows you to manipulate the top 2 of your deck, which is really good. Soul Blast is not too much of a resource. Yes, you need to rest this unit, which can be a bother, but overall, it's not that hard to deal with. The only problem that I have with this card is the fact that you are forced to put one of the 2 cards on the top of your deck. So if both cards are useless cards, you're still stuck with it, and you need to put one on the top, which you maybe have to draw, or maybe have to drive check. So there's something left to be desired, but at the very least, it's still a very good card that can also work with Bastion to some extent. So overall, a solid 4-star card, support card. Now followed up, we have a grade 2, which is Divine Sister Pastelito. And Pastelito has the ability Auto Rigger Circle once a turn. When your drive check reveals a trigger unit, costs Soul Blast 1, and this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now this to me is going to be a 2-star card, and the reason for that is that why did this have to need a Soul Blast cost? Like, the trigger clause should be enough for the 5k power, and on top of that the once per turn clause. Like, that should have been enough to make this card decent as a 15k attacker. Like, a lot of the other nations got 15k attackers with just a condition and no cost, and that's fine. But for some reason they had to put the Soul Blast clause on this card, which makes the card kind of awkward and bad in my opinion, especially with the other Soul Blast clause we've seen so far for the other cards that are probably way better than just the extra 5k power on this unit. So therefore, it's sadly a 2-star card in my opinion. Now, followed up, we got another Divine Sister, which is kind of interesting, as we have this grade 1 Divine Sister Fasciata, and Fasciata has the ability Auto Rigid Circle once a turn. When your drive check reveals a trigger unit, cost Soul Blast 2 and counter charge 1. Now, this for me is going to be a 2-star card. Like, it's a resource engine, which is alright, but changing 2 Soul to 1 counter blast might be a bit too heavy, especially with all the other Soul Blasting skills that we saw, and not a lot of counter blasting. Now granted, it's generic, so you could play this in other builds, but it's reliant on triggers, so it's not a consistent engine. So it's something to say at the very least. Now, something else that's also something, but a bit more spicy, is Divine Sister Lapisto. And Lapisto has the ability Auto Rigid Circle. When your drive check reveals a trigger unit, cost Counter Blast 2, and stand this unit. And it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now, interesting enough, this isn't once per turn. So yes, of course, it's only with your Vanguard, so it should be hard once per turn by that clause. And it's reliant on trigger units, but as we've seen, we have some cards that can manipulate it a little bit, so we have a bit more consistent. And Counter Blasting 2 to get a restand is a bit heavy, but currently I think it's fine for what it is, especially since we don't see a lot of Counter Blasting costs with Keter Sanctuary so far, so I think it's alright. And the extra 5k power is also pretty decent, as it's until the end of turn, so if there's for some apparent reason that we have multiple drive checks on more units, we have more counterblast to work with, we can restand this unit multiple times, and every time it gains a bit more power, and we can stack the trigger units on top of it. I don't know, maybe a certain card can do that. There are fun things you can play around with this thing, and it gives your every Keter Sanctuary deck the option to at least have 4 attacks. Now, as we're going to see in Bastion, it opens up the doorways for 5 attacks. But with the overtrigger in mind, and you have multiple counterblasts to work with, and if we have the grade 1 that can Soul Blast to generate countercharge, you could maybe attack 3 times with this unit, or 4 times, which is kind of ridiculous. So yeah, yay for high roll, but all things considered, I think it's an alright 3-star card. Like, this card opens up options for whatever deck you might play, and it might not be as consistent, but at the very least, it gives the options to potentially multi-tech, and multi-tech enablers are always going to be pretty solid as long as they're playable, and I think this is a playable card. Now, that said, let's go over the second archetype of Keter Sanctuary, which is of course the Bastion archetype. I've been throwing his name around this video so far, so let's talk about where all the fuzz is about. And we're gonna start off with the right line and the grade 1 of that right line, which is of course Knight of Heavenly Sword, Fort. And Fort has the ability Auto, when this unit is rode upon by Knight of Heavenly Spear Rooks, cost reveal 2 grade 3 cards from your hand, reveal the top card of your deck, call to the Rigid Circle if it's a unit card, and put it in your drop zone if it isn't. And it has the ability Act on Rigid Circle once turn, cost counter plus 1, choose one of your grade 3 Vanguards, and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now, for me, this is going to be a 2-star card. I do not really like this card as much, because the Rigid Circle skill is pretty bad. I hate Counterblast power skills, especially if it's a Counterblast for 5k power. That's not great. And its right line ability, it's alright, but the problem is that I have with this card is that you're basically mulligan yourself into multiple grade 3s, and yes, I know the deck runs a lot of grade 3s, but still, it hurts your defensive capabilities in the early game a little bit. And the fact that the payout of this effect isn't even worth it, because you need to call the top card, and it can be triggers, and a lot of the times it is triggers. So it is kind of an RNG skill. It was 10 times better if you could draw into it, because then you have the shield value if it's trigger, and maybe call it later if it's actually a unit. And if it's an order card, you need to send it to the drop zone, and you don't even get any value off it. So yeah, for me, it's a 2-star card. I'm not really too keen about this particular one. Now, if we go to the grade 2 of the right line, it's a much better story, because we have Knight of Heavenly Spear Rooks, and Rooks has the ability Auto, when his unit is rode upon by Apex Ruler Bastion, cost reveal 3 grade 3 cards from your hand and draw a card. Now, again, you need to mulligan a bit into your Great Freeze to be able to facilitate this card, but you have a bit more time to actually draw into those Great Freeze as well. So there is more options to it to create this effect. And on top of it, it just draws you a card, which is 10 times better because you have agency over the value of that card. You don't mind if it's a trigger because at the very least, it's shield value in your hand. And then on top of it, its Rearguard Circle skill is also really good for Bastion, as it's continuous Rearguard Circle. During your turn, if you have 3 or more grade free units, this unit gets boost and power plus 15k. So it's a 15k booster on the Rearguard Circle, which allows you to create 28k columns with your Great Freeze, or in case of Bastions, it's going to be 30k columns, which are pretty good beefy numbers. So with it in mind, I think this is a solid 4-star card. Like, it allows you to be a bit more aggressive in the early game if you want to slam it down, and even though the deck relies heavily on Great Freeze, this grade 2 fixes the issue that it then has by running grade 2s, because you can move this card to the back row, thus not sacrificing the slots on the front row that should have gone to your Great Freeze. So this is the ideal card for a Bastion build, and I definitely can see this as a staple card for the grade 3 variant. Now, speaking about the Bastion build, we need to take a look at Bastion himself, so let's take a look at the grade 3 boss unit of that build, Apex Ruler Bastion. And Bastion has the abilities, continuous Vanguard Circle. During a turn, all of your grade 3 units get power plus 2k. There are 15k attackers, including himself. So with an 8k booster, it's 23, which are nice numbers. And with the 15k booster of the grade 2, it's 30k. Might sound weird, but if you went first, it's a really good magic number against a 10k grade 2 Vanguard, because that asks 25k shield in a format where most shields are 5k or 15k, so you can do the math. But on top of that, the actual value of Bastion lies in its second effect, which is Auto Vanguard Circle. Once a turn, at the end of the battle that your drive check revealed a grade 3, cost, discard a card from your hand, choose one of your rear guards, stand it, and it gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this is basically an Ashura Kaiser effect with grade 3 drive checks. This is the reason why you want to have a lot of Great Freeze to increase the consistency of actually resetting your units. And yes, you need to discard a card from your hand, but keep in mind, the condition is that you need to drive check a Great Free. Great Freeze usually have no shield, so you might as well just discard it and gain offensive value out of it. And the fact that the unit gains 10k power means that it can overcome defensive triggers, so that's also no issue. So this is a very aggressive deck. It's a bit RNG, but you can work your way around it RNG thanks to the fact that the right deck is a thing now. And everybody knows about the value and the power behind Bastion, so I don't think it would be too surprising to say that this card, in my opinion, is a solid 5-star card, and the reason why it's a centerpiece of one of the best decks that came out of set 1. Now, of course, if we're going to talk about Bastion, we need to talk about the support cards, which are all grade 3s. So let's take a look at all the interesting grade 3s that we've got with the first set, as well as the starter deck. And we start off with a unique card, which is Great Snake Witch Solaria. And Solaria has the ability, although when this card is discarded from your hand during your turn, cost counter +1, soul +1, and draw a card. So it's somewhat of a draw engine, and this synergizes with the right deck, as you can discard her for the right deck and you can activate the skill. But it also synergizes with Bastion, meaning you can activate this skill throughout the entirety of the game, which is actually really good. And if you drive check her, you can immediately discard her to activate the skill. So it's overall a decent card. It's not the most amazing card, and the draw is a bit overcosted. And yes, it has the condition that it still needs to be discarded to get the draw, so it can be a bit annoying. So it's very specific currently. So to me, it's going to be a 2-star card, as it can work. But I think there are better cards out there to be run in Bastion if you go the grade 3 route. And outside of Bastion, I don't really see a lot of value, as relying on that 1 or 2 turns to actually discard it, it's not that great, because outside that, in most builds, it's just vanilla. Now, another grade 3, which is kind of underwhelming, is Reminiscent Sword Vanuel. And Vanuel has the ability, on a Rearguard Circle, when this unit attacks, if you have 3 or more grade 3 units, cost counter +2, and this unit gets critical +1 until the end of battle. I don't have to explain why this is a 1-star. I already despise skills that use counterblast to gain power. Skills that use counterblast to gain criticals are just as bad and maybe even worse, because with no power, criticals mean absolutely nothing. If you can just stop the attack with 5k shield, what's the point of having 10,000 crits? Now, the issue here is that on top of that, it costs 2 counterblasts. So they're saying 10k power equals 1 crit. I don't think so. It's pretty bad. Like, this is not good. And on top of it, it's until the end of battle. If it at the very least was until the end of turn, you could combo this with Bastion because you could resend the unit, thus potentially gain more value of the crit pressure. But that's not the case. If you want to do that, it costs you 4 counterblasts. So yeah, 1 star. I advise you to ignore this card. Now, another card which falls in line that I don't like is the Witch from the starter deck, which is Vehement Witch Ramana. And this Witch has the ability on a Rigger Circle, when this unit attacks, cost counter +1, and this unit gets power +5 until the end of battle. Again, counterblasting for power, I do not like it. It's also at the end of battle, so it doesn't synergize with Bastion. It was a good card beater for the starter deck, but that's because the starter deck didn't really use counterblast, so you might as well use it for this card. But let's not kid ourselves, it's a 1 star. Let's move on. Now, another card from the starter deck, which is actually really interesting and actually pretty good, is Knight of Broadaxe Rafluk. And Rafluk has the ability, act on Rigger Circle, cost, put this unit into your soul, choose one of your grade 3 rearguards, and it gets power +10 until the end of turn. This is actually pretty good. You lose a card, but you gain a soul, and you give 10k power to the field, which is overall pretty decent. And the interesting thing about this card is that if you already have a filled board, and you need a way to call more cards to the field, or you want to call better cards, this card allows you to at least make room and not lose out on value. Because if you needed to call on top of a card, you lose the card anyways. Might as well get a soul and 10k power in the process if you could do that, which this card enables, so that's already pretty good. And on top of it, it's a grade 3, so if we get Soul Blast free card effects, hint hint hint, that combos nicely with that as well. But even if that's the case, I will only give this card 3 stars because there's still a very annoying condition on top of this card. In order to activate this skill, you need to be able to choose a grade 3 rearguard. Because that's the case, it's only a 3-star card. If it allows you to, at the very least, a grade 3 unit, meaning your Vanguard is also always an option, it probably will be a 4-star. But honestly, I would rather see this just as choose a unit, so you can give it to a grade 2, or a grade 1, or maybe even trigger for Christ's sake. That would actually be way more easier to attain. But there are situations, and I've seen this many times before, that this thing is on the board, and you need that extra soul to do a skill, but you cannot activate this card because you don't have a second grade 3 rearguard. I know it sounds hard to believe in Bastion, but it can happen. So yeah, that is a limiting factor to this card, so that's why I'm not too keen about it, because this also means it's less generic support, because it cannot be just a throwaway grade 3 in your build, because if you do not run excessive amount of grade 3s, the chance of activating the skill becomes less and less possible. So 3-star card with that in mind. Now, next up we've got another grade 3, which is actually really interesting and overall pretty good, is Knight of War Damage Fossat. And Fossat has the ability, continues a Rigger Circle. This unit cannot be chosen by your opponent's card effect, so it has the resist clause. Most cards so far with the resist clause are either completely garbage, or in Trickstar's case, are the foundation for the entire archetype. So where does this fall in line? Well, in this case, there's actual reason for the resist clause, because it has another effect, which is on a Rigger Circle. When this unit attack hits, countercharge 1 and soul charge 1. It's a resource engine, and a pretty good one at that, because it can hit rearguards, meaning you can easily activate this thing throughout the game. But on top of that, Bastion can potentially restand this thing to get even more value. So with it in mind, and it being completely generic, and it has self-protection built into the card, it's to me a solid 5-star card. This is pretty good. Now, next up we have another grade 3, which is kind of interesting, which is Actual Analyst Coca BL. And Coca BL has the ability, continues a Guardian Circle. If your Vanguard is Apex Ruler Bastion, this unit gets shield plus 5k for every 2 of your grade 3 units, includes this unit. So this is a grade 3 with shield, and that's very important, because running a deck with a lot of grade 3s means you lose out on shield value. This card combats that issue to some extent. But even if that's the case, I will only give this card 3 stars, because of a very important reason. It is completely tied to Bastion, so it's not generic and will not skill nicely in the future the moment that we step away from Bastion. But on top of that, your opponent dictates how much shield you're going to get out of it, because they can attack into your rear guards, so they can remove multiple Great Freeze. They can use control effects to destroy the field, thus also lowering the value of this card. But at the very least, this card will always have 5k shield value, because the moment you call her to the Guardian Circle, you have 2 Great Freeze because she is 1 and your Vanguard is 1, so it's 5k shield. But it can scale up in certain situations to 10k, 15k, 20k, or maybe even higher. So with it in mind, I think it's a solid 3-star card. It's a Guardian card that it works, it's interesting, it is a bit flexible, and might or might not impact the game depending on your matchup. And this is a nice way to design shield protecting card. Now another Great Free, which on paper sounds amazing, but in practice, just like the Great Free that we just talked about, can be a bit underwhelming, is Darkstained Dragon. This Great Free has the ability Act on Vanguard Circle. If you have 3 or more Great Free units, cost Soul Blast 2, and all of your Great Free units get boost until the end of turn. Now this sounds like an amazing card for Bastion, because you're running a surplus of Great Frees. You can build your entire board and then give all those units boost, and thus pumping out 30k columns. But in practice, I'm not very excited about this card. I can only give it right now 2 stars. Now, you might think I'm crazy on this part and this should be a 3-4-star card because it's pretty good. But let me explain a little bit. It's a Soul Blast 2. Meaning, there's a lot of chance that you will resolve this once and that's it. Because you might not have enough soul to keep fueling this card, as we have also other cards that use soul that are probably a lot better. And to even make it worse, we have a grade 2 that is already a 15k booster that doesn't cost us anything, thus making grade 3s into 50k boosters sounds a bit redundant. And let's say it differently. We can already call grade 1s to the field that are maybe 8k or 10k as boosters. So effectively what we're doing is we increase our columns with maybe 7 to 5k for 2 soul. Is that worth the soul? In my honest opinion, not so much. So it all comes down to your preference and how you analyze the card and how you see it. I personally do not like this card all too much. It can be a nice tech option. I think that's what this card should be, a tech choice. But it's definitely not something that will define the deck or be a staple for the nation. But you could have a completely different direction or a completely different opinion about this, but personally, I will rate this card not higher than 2 stars. Now, a card, a grade 3, that's actually way better, and this is also one of the reasons why I would say you could use your soul a bit better, is because of the grade 3 triple R that is Grand Heavenly Sword Elden. And Elden has the ability Auto, when his unit is placed in the Vanguard Circle, cost Counter Blast 2 and Soul Blast 1, choose a card from your hand, call to the Vanguard Circle. If you call the grade 3, draw 2 cards. So that's a pretty good draw card effect. But on top of that, we also have Auto Vanguard Circle. When this unit attacks, if you have 3 or more grade 3 units, this unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. So it can become a 20k attacker together with Bastion's 2k, of course. Now this to me, and I think a lot of people would think similarly to this, is a 5-star card. The draw engine is very important for Bastion to keep going through your deck and getting to shield value to basically dig and put away those grade 3s. And you can immediately call those grade 3s to build your board, which is also really good. And the extra 5k every single turn means you can pressure a bit better. And the power stays until the end of turn. So if this is your restand target, it means it is 20k on the first attack and then 35k on the second attack without any extra power. And the 35 is because you get that extra 10k of Bastion. So it starts to beat for pretty good numbers on its own without calculating any boosters or whatever in the mix. So all the more reasons why this is a very good 5-star card for Bastion. And that rounds up the Bastion support cards, but that said, we have a couple of orders that we need to go over, so let's talk about the last couple of cards, which are the normal orders and blitz orders for this particular nation. And we start off with the blitz order, which is Hopeful Tetsudo. And Tetsudo has the ability, if you have 3 or more units, choose one of your units and it gets power plus 15k until the end of the battle. So it's pretty easy to fulfill. However, your opponent can somewhat play around it if they retire your units and can shut off this blitz order if they have the option to do so. So with it in mind, I think it's an alright 3-star card. Like, it will matter, but sometimes it can backfire a little bit depending on your matchup. Now the second order that we've got is something that's very similar to Elden, as we've got the grade 3 normal order that is the Hour of Holy Judgment cometh. And this normal order has the ability, play this with cost, counter +2, draw 2 cards, choose one of your units, and it gets power +5k until the end of turn. Now this is very similar to Elden, because Elden, it draws you 2 cards, it costs 2 counterless, it costs a Soul Blast, and it is a unit that gains 5k power every single time. Now you might think to yourself, Elden is a bit more expensive because it also has Soul Blast, but this is an order card, so you discard the card, so it's discard and 2 counterless. So maybe this is a bit more expensive. The only difference is that Elden specifically forces you to call a grade 3 in order to gain the 2 draw. So this card is more flexible and can actually be used in decks outside of Bastion if they just want the extra draw power. The only issue that I have with this card is that it costs 2 counterless, thus it's harder to slot this in every strategy, and your opponent can damage choke you to some extent and you not be able to resolve this skill. So with it in mind, I think it's an alright 3-star order. Like, there is value behind this, it's definitely playable in the current environment of Overdress, but it's definitely not the most perfect order out there, and there's definitely a scenario or a reasoning to say that you don't want to play this order. So for that, I think it's an alright 3-star order. Now finally we have one more normal order for Keter Sanctuary, which is another grade 3 that is Swinging Swords of Judgment. And this order has the ability, play this with cost, sold as 1 grade 3, and that is where we're gonna backtrack a little bit. Choose one of your opponent's rearguards. Your opponent puts all of their rearguards in the same column as that rearguard on the bottom of your deck in any order. So it's basically a column snipe. And that's actually pretty powerful because you can remove 2 cards on your opponent's side of the field with one particular effect. Now, the Soul Blast grade 3 clause on this effect might sound really slow, and in most cases that's the case, but if you play Refluke, you can put the grade 3 into the Soul on turn 3 and immediately resolve this effect and have this effect on your very first grade 3 turn. Now, if you want to do that and make this card somewhat fast and playable, you need to run both those grade 3s. And in order to use Refluke, you need to run even more grade 3s to be able to actually activate that on the very first grade 3 turn. So that immediately tells us it's going to be in the Bastion build. But that's not consistent and not overly generically enough to justify this effect. In most builds, it's going to be a turn 4 play, which is in my opinion a bit too slow to actually get a lot of value of it. But on top of that, another reason why I'm not too keen about this order card is that it's a retire-centric or control-centric effect in a nation that doesn't give any crap about set control aspect. Like, if this was a retire skill and it was in Dragon Empire, then there was way more things to consider that just make this order card pretty playable, because Dragon Empire, especially in the cases of Eugene, cares for those retires. So with that in mind, I will only give this card honestly 2 stars. It's a bit too slow, it's a bit inconsistent, and even when it goes off, how much do you actually care for the value that you get out of it? You still lose a card in hand, and if you went for the Refluke play, it's actually 2 cards that you lose to remove 2 cards from your opponent's side of the field. And it's a 2-for-2 trade. Is that worth it? Honestly, in a nation that doesn't care for retire, not really in my opinion. And with that, we basically talked about all the cards that we got for Keter Sanctuary in the very first support wave for Vanguard Overdress. And we saw a lot of interesting cards. I mean, we have the deck manipulation that's very OTT-like with the new Sorceress archetype, as well as something I wouldn't, and I think nobody expected this, a Morikawa playstyle in Keter Sanctuary that actually works, but more importantly, it's actually incredibly strong. I don't know how they did it, but they managed to do so. And that is Bastion for you. But with that said, that basically rounds up the entire set review for Keter Sanctuary. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think of all these cards that we've got for Keter Sanctuary. Are you excited about these cards? Are you happy with the support that Bastion got? Because when Bastion first was revealed, a lot of people were kind of skeptical and were scared about how good the deck actually would be because it needed a lot of support. Well, one set later, we got a lot of support, so I'm very curious if you're happy with this type of support, if you can definitely see the potential in Bastion, and also, what is your thought about the Sorceress archetype? Yes, it lacks a bit in the support department, but I can definitely see something going on that deck, and especially with future support. So let me know all your thoughts in the comments section down below. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one!